Hello and welcome to Security Scan. I am Uday Bhaskar. This week, the focus is on the prevailing security situation in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, where the external and internal strands overlap in a tangled manner. We will seek to objectively assess their virulence and validity and try to dwell on the policy initiatives that are needed. To briefly recap, on April 27th, an army camp in Panjgam was attacked by terrorists. A young officer was killed, and this was the 10th such attack on a hard target in Jammu and Kashmir since 2016. On May 1st, 2 Indian security personnel were killed in an attack from across the line of control and their bodies mutilated. The anger and anguish in the country is palpable. And on the same day, 5 policemen and 2 bank staff were killed in the Kulgam district by militants. And within the valley, domestic unrest and a show of no confidence in the political dynamic continues. The image of girl students throwing stones at security personnel captures what may be interpreted as a corrosively significant punctuation in the traumatic history of the Kashmir Valley. Since the elimination of Burhan Wani, a terrorist leader, in July 2016, Jammu and Kashmir has been in a state of simmering turmoil and discord. Some experts aver that apart from the traditional support to anti-India constituencies in the valley, the ideology of the Islamic State or the Daesh has found widespread support among the youth, and that India's greatest security challenge is to contain and eliminate this emerging threat. Is this a valid assumption? Many seasoned Kashmiri watchers have characterized the current ambiance as akin to early 1990, with an increase in radical Islamist fervor and intimidation when the Hindu demography of the valley was driven out and, alas, the state abdicated. Is the current situation unprecedented, and are both Delhi and Srinagar unable to appreciate the gravity of the situation? Or is this one more phase of terror-driven violence in the troubled trajectory of J&K? To discuss this wide spectrum of issues, we have an eminent panel. Allow me to introduce and welcome Mr. Shekhar Gupta, Senior Editor, currently founder of The Print; Mr. Wajahat Habibullah, who is currently the Chairman of the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative and a former Commissioner of Kashmir; and Ms. Ruwa Shah, who is with the Indo-Asian News Service and who knows Kashmir very well. Let me turn to you first, Shekhar. You have been writing about Kashmir for years that I can recall. We've seen the last week. How would you characterize the current security situation in Jammu and Kashmir?
Well, every turn in Kashmir, every turn for the worse is unprecedented, because each time it is worse than what we've seen in the past. In 2010, when similarly stone throwing started, I think a lot of people said this is the worst ever, the valley can never come back from this. In fact, some very well known, popular, and I would say very level-headed columnists and commentators then said, Kashmir ko jane do, Kashmir ko chhod do. And my point then was, kahan jane do aur kahan chhod do.
We discussed this.
We discussed this because Kashmir goes through these phases. So unprecedented is fine, because this is a new level of escalation. But whether it is a point of no return, I entirely disagree with that. Things look worse. It's a great failure that instead of looking better on a more consistent basis, things look better for some time in Kashmir and again take a turn for the worse. And when they take a turn for the worse, it becomes much, much worse. So that's a cause for concern. Otherwise, I don't see it as a situation of apocalypse.
What about you, Mr. Habibullah? When I was raising this point saying that between Delhi and Srinagar, are they sort of able to appreciate the gravity of the situation when Shekhar talks about comparing it to 2010? Because there's one school of thought which says that Srinagar has lost the plot.
Well, whether Srinagar has lost the plot or not, I wouldn't really comment on that. But the fact is that there's a complete lack of sensitivity being displayed towards developments inside Kashmir, where it is very different. You mentioned the fact that I was Commissioner of Kashmir, and it was in 1990 when the outbreak actually took place, when I was Commissioner of Kashmir. There is a palpable difference between what happened then and what happened now. Then also, a lot of young people who are now middle-aged, they were the ones who led the movement, but the movement was led by a hatred and an anger with the political leadership of the time. Therefore, the way out was also quite clear. The challenge was to restore confidence in the system, in the leadership, and go on from there. And that is the effort that has been going on for so many years. Now, unfortunately, what has happened is, and when Shekhar mentioned the question of point of no return, where a person like myself has grave apprehensions, is because this is a whole new generation which has been affected by this. Normally, through all the efforts that I mentioned have gone into the state since 1990 to restore confidence, to recover standing inside the state, that should have the young people who were born in 1990 and thereafter should have been the ones that should have been actually affected, and people felt that no, the past was a bleak part of our history. Now there's much to look forward to in the future. That has not happened, and as you can see, these young people have come out and they are moved by hatred. It's not anger, it is hatred against their forebears, against their own political leadership across the board.
But they see no future, no hope.
That is what is so frightening about the present situation. So what the challenge before us is, and when you ask the political leadership must be the leadership which gives them hope. But no effort has been made to give them that hope.
I think the young generation is where we have to bring you in, Ms. Shah. Two sort of issues that I'd like you to perhaps share your thoughts with us. One is immediately, this image of these students, girl students, throwing stones at the security forces, it's gone viral outside of India also. What does that denote? Is it a reflection of the same lack of hope now which is crossing gender? Because traditionally we have not seen girls and women being part of the protest. And the second is, what is your own reading as someone who knows Kashmir, who's been following Kashmir, about the mood as far as the youth are concerned?
I think when I first saw these pictures of girls on the streets, it was shocking for me as well, because I belong to the same college that these girls came out from. Monday it was when they came out 2 weeks back. And I could relate to them, I will tell you. I could relate to them in a way that when I was in Kashmir in 2016 covering the unrest, I was also angry with the state in a way that my brothers, my friends, fathers, everybody, everybody is a victim in Kashmir. And you have to understand that. The Indian state has to understand the anger that the youth is, it's not only girls are coming out right now, so how to handle this situation. It has been there always. There have been women protesters who have been, pelting stones on security forces even in 2008, 2010. But at this level, yes, this is for the first time, because they got an opportunity. They were in schools, they were not in the, within their houses and everything. They were in schools. And you might also have seen a different trend, that was while these protests were happening, all the business and everything was going on as usual. It did not alter any business. There was no hartal. There was no call for shutdown by any group or leadership. It was a voluntary movement, and it still continues to be. There is no leadership that is, actually forcing them to do this. It is on their own. The girls are coming out and crossing the gender, as you said. This is for the first time. You see, it's very depressing, but I would say genuine at the same time.
So 2 points you're making. One is that it is spontaneous and a reflection of the disillusionment, lack of hope.
Right.
Shekhar, there are 2 points here. One on the security side. The mutilation of the bodies of the 2 Indian security personnel and the mood in the country now. Now, we often say that the Indian army knows what to do, left to itself. What about the political, shall we say, management of this issue, going back to the surgical strike of last year to where we are now? Now, you've been covering wars, you reported, you've written, you've been an editor. So can you help us to understand the political dynamic in relation to the cross-border, the mutilation, and whatever is happening within Pakistan? Is General Bajwa supporting, not supporting, and so on?
Well, first of all, a lot of these things on the LOC are tactical. LOC has an ongoing blood feud both sides play these games. Bats from both sides, border action teams, indulged in headhunting metaphorically and sometimes, unfortunately, literally. So as far as this action is concerned, I don't like to use the term avenge, but Indian Army will get even. In fact, Indian Army will more than get even. It's a very tough army. It's been there for a very long time. It's not a pushover. It's not a peacekeeping force. It will sort things out at the ground level. The problem arises because of the way the BJP has constructed the politics around these incidents. When UPA was in power for 10 years, any such incident was made out to be an issue of great national honor. They were senior BJP women leaders, Smriti Irani in this case, offering to send bangles, although I'm surprised that an independent woman would use that metaphor, sending bangles to somebody as bangles as a metaphor for weakness. There were people saying, Sharm se mar jao, doob ke mar jao, sir chupane ki jagah nahi hai. So every tactical incident on the LOC, if it is to be made, another one, our current External Affairs Minister said, ek sir ke badle mein 10 sir leke aao, right? So once you up it for 10 years like that, and when you are in power, and you face the same reality on the ground, what do? You cannot bring back 10 heads for, I mean, in this case, 20 heads for 2. So, political sagacity and political wisdom requires that you cauterize these incidents like little wounds and deal with them there. But if you let them go out of hand, you could get into, do you really want to get into an Iran-Iraq kind of situation? A war that goes on forever, just lobbing artillery shells over each other with no objective. Looking at the relative strengths of the two armed forces of the two nations, I say this with humility, that I do not believe that any country can achieve anything in Kashmir across the LOC militarily. Nobody can alter the status of the LOC.
I think this has been said in the past that Pakistan cannot take Kashmir by force. And the flip side is that India should not assume that it can retain it by force, has been said in the past.
I think that is not the full story. India also cannot take what remains of Kashmir with Pakistan by force. So let's be realistic and say.
No, we are realistic on that. Despite what Mr. Narasimha Rao had said about unfinished business, that's fine.
Everybody has to say it because the Pakistanis were saying it. The fact is that the history of mankind post Second World War tells you that one of the most toxic things for a nation is what political scientists would call or strategists would call irredentism.
And don't redraw borders.
I used to have these territories. The Chinese have the disease. True. I mean, how are they naming places in Arunachal in their own way?
Because bring you back for China, I think.
Because they are irredentist. In fact, my answer to that is, let us rename Beijing Majnu ka Tila.
But that's another subject for discussion. But Wajahat, I want to ask you one thing. He's spoken about the lack of a certain consensus in the political establishment of India, BJP versus Congress, for instance, in dealing with, say, the Pakistan issue. But on the internal security of Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, would you say that there is a case again for a certain degree of political consensus between the principal parties so that there is no point scoring and the local police is then not torn in different directions? I mean, I often hear this from the local police.
Well, see, Shekhar has said, we've got an extremely competent army, totally self-sufficient, capable of handling these situations. Certainly, when an incident like this occurs, the political leadership have to give a direction, and Mr. Jaitley came on the television and made his announcement. The rest should be left now to the army as to how to deal with it and to give a fitting reply. For the media to drum up a lot of emotion and things, virtually as a sort of form of jingoism that we're ready to go to war, I think is in the first place wrong. The second thing, which brings me to the question you have put to me, let us not confuse the issue by slapping Kashmiris in the face. We are not putting right the threat from Pakistan. Let us not confuse the issue. The Kashmiris are our own people. If we agree, we disagree with them, we feel that their young people have taken the wrong path, then let us reach out to them and tell them why we feel so. Tell them you are one of us and we are one of you. And the grounds for that exists. It is not that because they are Muslim, they all happen to be pro-Pakistan or all highly radicalized Jaish people or something, ISI people. That's not true. Kashmir has always had, and the Kashmiris have always had, and this has been true for centuries, they've had an identity which includes a religious identity of their own, which is quite distinct, which, as Farooq Abdullah was saying the other day, and I know this to be a fact, which is why Sheikh Abdullah actually led his people to accession to India rather than the rising Muslim country which is Pakistan. Why have we not taken this into account? Our attitudes, and in the media everywhere, even the political leadership, the attitudes are, well, these are actually pro-Pakistani, whole lot of pro-Pakistani people. We've got to minimize the effect that Pakistan has on them. That is our task. That is not the task. Please, there has to be a consensus. Since you asked this question, there has to be a consensus on the political leadership to accept the Kashmiris as our own people.
Does the administration have a role here? You're a senior IAS man. Would you say that your cadre, J&K, and other members of your fraternity could also make a contribution in this direction? Or is it only political?
Well, yes. As I have said, and I've said so on the television and otherwise also written about it, I feel a great sense of personal failure for what has happened.
About the turn of events.
It is, and because this young generation, which has grown up since the time that I was commissioner, has been altogether lost. Why? Because, you know, the political leadership has its own political compulsions. The defense, defense hierarchy has its military compulsions. What does our structure provide for this kind of a situation? That is why we have a civil administration.
So the administration has a role, is the short point.
A central role.
Okay, let me get Ruwa in here. Ruwa, 2 points that picking up from what Wajahat has said. One is this perception about the Islamic State. And, you know, post Burhan Wani, I have seen this many times, some videos on social media, etc., suggesting that the youth in Kashmir is increasingly moving towards the ideology of the IS. I find that difficult to believe, but I want you to sort of share your thoughts there.
First,
and then we'll come back to the media issue.
I'll come to his point first, where he said that, you know, Indian state has to reach out to Kashmiris. It has been 70 years of conflict where thousands and lakhs of people have died. And if the Indian state still does not know what the Kashmiris want, what the aspirations of the Kashmiri people are, then, you know, there is no way out. If you have to accept that the entire generation is not they do not consider themselves as part of India. And sending interlocutors, sending parties now and then, again back channels, and then asking them to analyze the situation and then give the responses. Come on, are you telling me that you don't know what Kashmiris want? The government does not know, and so far they have failed to understand. It's just that they try to, you know, cover it up just to give it a color.
I'll get Shekhar to respond, but it's not as if it's been uniform for the last 70 years. I mean, we have had what I might call as a stable phase.
But then at least the governments would consider that, you know, talks would be held, and we had I think in 2004 and 2003 we had talks. Now, why doesn't anybody right now talk about talks? And you talk about the younger generation. They are there is a rise in militancy. Why are they doing so? Because they do not have an option, because you're not listening to them. There is nobody who is talking to them. And they have no other option. The internet is curbed, there is a ban on social media. And then you ask them, why are you pelting stones on the security forces? I don't think that, you know, the Indian state has given them a chance.
Yeah, let's leave this one about Islamic State.
Islamic State, I refuse to believe that there is any support on ground for the Islamic State. People even don't know that what it is. And there might be just few flags that that some part of the media, you know, there are elements who try to propagate their own messages. And it is only for, I have spoken to many of them, and I have learned it that it's only for the provocation, and just that because they do not have any other option.
It's only for
provocation. Yes.
Shekhar, you want to comment on this Islamic State and the media?
I think Islamic State is just a convenient monster that that many of us have painted to deny the facts on the ground. The inconvenient fact on the ground, as Ruwa says, is that people are very angry and very alienated, and this is across the board. The young show it most visibly, but everybody is alienated. Having said that, I don't agree with Ruwa when she says obviously the government, the Indian government knows what they want, because what they want cannot be given. I mean, we have to be realistic. I'd rather be realistic instead of being, and I would request also my Kashmiri countrymen to be realistic and not. It's all right. Okay, let me not get into an argument with that. So within that realistic picture, an Indian state, as she describes it, or people of India have to reach out to Kashmir. They have to convince the Kashmiris that you are equal citizens. You cannot not make an effort of that and then say Kashmiris don't treat themselves, don't think of themselves as equal Indian citizens. Because if you first have to do it over 70 years, 100 years, 170 years, 270 years. On the other hand, the inclination now is to paint them all as evil. Just because they disagree with you, they throw stones at you, they fire bullets at you, some of them become terrorists. You say they must all have become Daesh supporters because Daesh is a globally acknowledged devil now. You know, there's old grandmother's wisdom is never paint the devil on the wall because then he comes and visits you. So,
Okay.
so I do not believe for one moment that there is any Daesh or there is any ISIS in Kashmir.
Okay.
Even
Daesh is just born yesterday. You know, Kashmir conflict has been going on for nearly a decade now.
I'm just
and,
saying
and,
that
it's a global
and I agree with her. The odd flag that comes out, or you know, even Pakistan Zindabad that comes out is 90% to provoke and to irritate security forces, and frankly now to irritate primetime TV anchors.
Which is, but I just want to say one, you know, sort of broader point as a security analyst. I think while this anxiety about the Islamic State in J&K may be misplaced, we have, I would say, some empirical evidence to say that there are pockets within India where this particular ideology has found some adherents. When we are talking about people from Kerala having extended support, but let's leave the Islamic State aside.
Less than 100 people in a population of 15 crores.
I request you to come in on this point. Ruwa seems to suggest that for 70 years, New Delhi has been oblivious. I thought that was, you know, perhaps not accurate because from the period 47-50, almost up to 90, we had a stable relationship between Srinagar and Delhi. It's only after 1990, the Pandits being forced out, the exodus, you find what I would call as a deterioration internally. Would that be correct?
Let me try to put this in context. Yes, from 1950 onwards, the question was, although I think that it was a major blunder to have actually sacked and arrested Sheikh Abdullah, but let us not go into that, that's been argued considerably. The fact is that after that, there has been a general thing to be inclusive insofar as Kashmir is concerned, and that inclusive policy led to the Indira Sheikh Accord of 1975. It was an attempt, and at that time, the greatest dissenter, the greatest dissident, and the supporter of the idea of plebiscite happened to be the plebiscite front led by Sheikh Abdullah. So with that absorption, then you had elections, and you had the coming in of a whole democratic process. So it has been undulating, yes. It was a little before your time, so you won't remember that time, but I was very much there and was party to it, therefore saw it. But things started going wrong. We needn't go into the details of that, but yes, in early 1990, what happened was there was a complete insurrection. We talk about proxy war, but what happened in 1990, I was there, I saw it. The whole thing actually imploded from within. There had to be security buses loaded with security just to take people from their houses to the secretariat. The government had ceased to function. Now, what happened, I suspect, is that not ISIS but ISI saw this as a major opportunity.
And were able to stoke the sentiment.
That time, they tried to work up sentiment on religious grounds, which, as has been said, were never really a foundation for the Kashmiri thinking. It was always rather eclectic and inclusive thinking. This was cultivated, and that led to a panic in the Kashmiri Pandit community, which a large section of them actually fled. I worked very closely with them also, so I happen to know these things. But the fact is that that was then engineered, and it had its evil consequences. Unfortunately, our reaction to that also was not, now let us reassure the Kashmiris, let the Kashmiri Pandits, let them come back, tell the people here, tell these people to reassure. And there were people within Kashmir who came to see me when I was commissioner, saying that call them back, why have they gone away? There were those people, they were not encouraged. Right. So you had that, but may I then differ also on one point? Yes, ISIS and Daesh and things have really no presence inside the valley. But what has happened now is a growing radicalization. Why? Young people are telling their parents, telling their forebears that, look, you kept talking to us about tolerance and this kind of thing. This is where it has brought us. This radicalization is growing in the middle classes.
And that, as you said earlier, is the frightening part.
That is the frightening part. It has affected these young people.
I'm sorry I have to interrupt you because this is a subject we perhaps will have to revisit. But Kashmir has tested the founding principles of independent India since August 1947, when the political leadership at the time, led by Mahatma Gandhi, refused to accept the two-nation theory that prioritized religion as the basis for statehood. The contested political geography and the resultant demographic discord have bedeviled the bilateral relationship between India and Pakistan, with the latter taking recourse to reckless revisionist adventurism. The Kargil War of 1999 is illustrative. The internal situation in Jammu and Kashmir has been progressively troubled since early 1990, when a combination of domestic and regional factors, including the blowback from the Afghan war, have introduced a virulent strand of religious radicalism. Stoked and supported by Pakistan, this external impetus midwifed the transmutation in the valley from militancy and aggrieved sub-nationalism to terrorism, a degree of Wahhabi Islamism, and an untenable political objective. In the intervening decades, from Prime Minister Narasimha Rao to Prime Minister Modi now, Delhi has sought accommodation within the ambit of the Indian Constitution, but in vain. There have been mistakes made both in Srinagar and Delhi, and the much needed faith in the political process has been eroded. As our discussion highlighted, the current situation is bleak, but not devoid of slender hope, and some potentially positive possibilities do exist. However, as is the case in any region that is weighed down by the fog of trauma, violence, memory, and societal expectations that remain unrealized, the gun has to be set aside for dialogue and reconciliation to commence. It is likely to be a turbulent summer for Jammu and Kashmir this year, and at the end of the day, it is the local population who are the critical stakeholders. Emotive binary reductions of a complex and contested territorial issue that is deeply linked to the history of the subcontinent and its aspirations must be avoided. Where there are no viable solutions in the short term, equitable and ethical management of discord and mistrust that reduces violence and bloodshed may be an objective that Delhi and Srinagar must strive towards this summer. On that note, allow me to thank my guests, Mr. Shekhar Gupta, Mr. Wajahat Habibullah, and Ms. Rowa Shah. And thank you for watching Security Scan. Goodbye.